All right, welcome everybody to Pro 213. This is week 2. This week we're going to talk a little bit more about our personal finances. Last week we talked about budgeting. This week our overall focus is going to be about lifestyle choices when it comes to our finances. Hopefully you found last week's exercise to create a budget and to begin tracking your budget helpful. Many times for most of us it just is an exercise where we find out that there are a few extra dollars that are disappearing somewhere. I refer to this on the discussion board as what they call in the retail space slippage. You might be aware of that from if you've ever worked at a retail location. Slippage is of course when things go missing and inventory shrinks or shrinkage. The inventory shrinks over time because of theft, because of loss, because of all kinds of different reasons, but mostly it's because of theft. So if you're running a Walmart location, your inventory will have some shrinkage or slippage because of some theft that you don't catch, right? And so because of that, your overall inventory will shrink over time, some. Now you account for that, of course, and have profitability that makes up for that, but that's just part of being a retail business. Now when it comes to your budget, the same kind of situation occurs. Not exactly the same. You're not a retail operation, but some of your money each month probably slips away or shrinks away based on things that you're not aware of or things that you're not, maybe subconsciously you make decisions all the time to eat out or to get a coffee or to, buy this or buy that here and there. But it's not something that you really think about. You get to month end and you run out of money every month because of things that aren't budgeted for and things that you don't anticipate or plan for. And a lot of times it's the small things that add up throughout the month that create that slippage or shrinkage that we're talking about within a budget. So just creating a budget and living by a budget and trying to keep track periodically, whether or not that's through an app or through software like we talked about, can help you to control the amount of shrink or slip that occurs within your finances. I tell people all the time when they tell me how much they should save each month, they ask me, they say, how much should we save? And I say, well, that probably isn't the right question, right? We need to, first of all, look at your finances, see what kind of discretionary money there is, and then automate that discretionary money so that it's not about us getting to the end of the month and then deciding how much to save. It's about that already being built in to our automatic finances each month. What do I mean by that? Well, every 2 weeks, if you get paid, you're automatically paying down debt. You're automatically saving some. You're automatically investing for the future through a retirement program. If you've got all those things in place, then we don't wait till the end of the month and hope that there's extra money left over and then make a decision at that point on what to do. Usually, for about 99% of the population, usually waiting till the end of the month and trying to be frugal throughout the month with our finances is kind of a futile task, a futile exercise, because most of us will end up at the end of the month with nothing discretionary to save, because whether or not it's conscious or subconscious, most of us will spend what we have, okay, no matter how much the number is. I've got people that make $500,000 a year and spend everything they make. And I've got people who, as clients at my work, that make $25,000, $30,000, a very modest income, and are able to save each month because of the choices that they make and because of making their finances automatic, and especially their saving and debt pay down part of their finances. Okay? All right. So hopefully you enjoyed that exercise. Hopefully it wasn't too painful and tedious. I find budgeting and creating new budgets kind of tedious. But once you've got one and once you've got a routine and checking it and accounting for what you're doing, maybe you've got some good software, a good app on your phone that helps you out with it, it can become very, very easy to keep track. And if you find yourself in a situation where there's no way that you're ever going to budget and keep to a budget, then you might want to consider a little bit more extreme measures, which might include a cash-only budget. We talked about that. If you're in debt, trouble with debt or credit cards, a cash-only budget can get you in control and on track, meaning you don't do anything with except with cash, and that helps you to live within your means and kind of forces the issue. So that's one way. The other way is to automate more or get rid of the credit cards and issues that might be spinning you into kind of a out of control state as far as your finances are concerned. So there are some more extreme things that you may have to do. Initially, though, if you can create a budget and stick with a budget and be fairly disciplined about how you act with your finances throughout the month, and also automate some of your savings and investing and debt pay down, you might be able to do it without a cash only system. It's still maybe maintain, credit card rewards or something like that that you might enjoy, and just the convenience of being able to use a card potentially. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lifestyle. I mentioned, just as a reminder though, I mentioned last week as part of our first session that I would grade everything by Tuesday at noon. I have not graded last week's discussion boards. I anticipate that I'll be doing that tonight or early tomorrow morning. So you will have a grade as well as some feedback within the next day, within the next 24 hours. So look for that. As far as the participation, I thought it was very good. One of the things that kind of people alluded to, but we didn't really discuss very well last week, was the idea of Credit Karma. CreditKarma.com is a great site for some different tools regarding your finances, also kind of like Mint.com, but Mint.com is more for budgeting and financial kind of strategy, and Credit Karma is more focused on your credit and debt. And Credit Karma shows you your credit scores. It tells you different ways to improve your credit score. It's a free service, just like Mint is, and I'd encourage you to consider it. I'm not a paid solicitor for any of these sites, but I've used Credit Karma for a few years now and appreciate the information that it gives. Because you always want to be trying to increase your credit scores. Even if you don't need credit right away, it's important at some point probably to buy a house or to do something that involves your credit. So I'd encourage you to try to consider different ways to improve your credit, even if it means that you're not taking debt. You're not trying to go into debt, but you're just trying to make sure that your credit score is as high as possible for the day that you might need to use that credit to get a loan of some kind and want the lowest interest rate possible. Because when you're talking about a home mortgage or a car, the difference between a good rate and a bad rate might be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in interest. And so you'll want to keep your score as high as you possibly can. You want to track it. You want to make sure you understand why you have the score you do, and then try to improve it the best way you can. We also talked about tools, different apps and sites for budgeting. Lots of mobile sites now for budgeting. So just if you're always going to have your phone with you, that's a real easy way to kind of keep track and keep on top of it. And so, I'd encourage you to try out a mobile site and see if it's a good fit for you, if it's easy to use, if it's, obviously if it's free. And if you can find one that's free and is a good fit, then that's a great place to start as far as budgeting is concerned. All right. We talked about automating things. I won't cover that again, but it's something that I've stressed last session. I've already alluded to it this session, but automating as much of your bills and of your paying yourself as far as your savings and investing and paying down debt is concerned is really a key to most people's success long term. The more automatic it is, the more consistent they can be with it. The more consistent they can be with it, the more successful they usually are. So that's the beauty of automating things. Every bank and every bank account will allow you to automate transfers into savings, allow you to automate payments, will allow you to overpay, to pay down different debts a little faster. So all those tools are built into whatever banking relationship you choose to have, credit union relationship, whatever it is that you use for banking. And then we talked about some tips and tricks last time. I just reiterate some of the most important ones. Make sure you've got others buy in. If you're a couple, if your household finances are you and maybe one other adult, make sure that you've got that other adult's buy-in, because if you're sharing finances, they can ruin any kind of budget that you effort, right? So you can be trying to be really, disciplined about how you spend, and if they don't, then it doesn't matter for your household finances. So first step is to try to get some buy-in from all those who are participating in the finances for your household. Even other family members that aren't necessarily adults and participating in your household budgeting might be helpful to at least educate them on what goes on in your family finances. Help them to appreciate the things that you pay for each month and work really hard for. That might make them a little bit more appreciative of what they have and be more judicious in what they ask for. Could. Doesn't necessarily always work that way, but that's something that could help the dynamic in your family. If your kids are always asking for expensive things, you find yourself trying to fight that all the time. Well, involving them in the family finances and them seeing kind of the budget and what you spend and how you spend it might help them to temper some of those wants. Make sure and allow and adjust as needed. Allow for a buffer and adjust as needed. There are always going to be things that happen that are unplanned, right? And that's where your emergency reserve account, your buffer, and also the ability to change and adjust if you need to on the fly are very important. A budget's not something you create and it stays static. It's something that's more organic. It'll change and develop over time. And there absolutely will be times when you need lump sums that are outside of your budget. And that's where it is so important to have that emergency reserve account. And, that's got to be top priority. If you don't have an emergency reserve account, try to get a few bucks put together, because we all know that something will happen as far as medical, house, change in housing, change in vehicle breakdown, family emergency. There's all kinds of things that happen to us financially that stress us financially. And if we've got a little bit in reserve, sometimes that's just the buffer that we need to kind of continue on with our budget. If we don't have any in reserve, then it blows up our budget. We get backwards into debt, and sometimes we get in a situation where we can't cover all the expenses going forward because of the debt that we assumed. So, we all know that logically that we need that. Sometimes it's difficult to discipline ourselves to kind of take away from today's, enjoyments. Maybe that's our daily trip to a certain fast food place or a certain treat that we like. It's hard to scale that back sometimes in order to accomplish, some kind of reserve account so that you'll be safe, when things get bad. I mentioned the cash-only system. The actual system is called the envelope system. It's the envelopes budget. And that's where you pre-budget for every single thing in a month. You put cash into envelopes for those different things, and it forces you to only use money for the things that you've pre-budgeted cash for. So if you don't have cash in the envelope for clothes, you don't get any more clothes. If you don't have cash in the envelope for fast food or for treats, you don't get to do it. Entertainment, house rent, car payment, all those things, insurance, you pre-budget all that stuff at the beginning of the month, and you don't vary from it because all you have is cash to use. You don't get to use a credit card or some kind of plastic to make you have a false sense that you can go beyond your budget, right? So it's highly effective. It's kind of a pain, but if you find yourself spinning out of control every month, or you have a lot of slippage within your budget, meaning you make $2,000, you only have $1,200 worth of fixed expenses, but somehow $800 just completely disappears each month, where you have nothing to show for it, a cash-only budget might help you to get that back in check and be able to make sure and force the issue of saving a little bit, investing a little bit, and paying down debt. Keep talking about those three themes, but saving a little bit, investing a little bit, and paying down debt are things that we all, at some level, and within moderation, obviously, and all three of those things, not crazy with all three, but some level, we're trying to accomplish all three of those things on an ongoing basis within our budget, which sometimes is very, very challenging. I understand that, but we can accomplish a little bit towards all three of those ends, no matter where we're at financially. And then we, of course, created a budget last week on Excel. Excel is always an option, to keep a budget. People who do accounting, finance majors, accountants, whenever I run into them within my job, it seems like inevitably they always have a spreadsheet. They keep spreadsheets for all their investments. They keep spreadsheets for their insurance. They keep spreadsheets for their budget. And sometimes they'll run amortizations on their cars and on their homes, on the loans that they have as well. But most of us, outside of finance and accounting majors, most of us don't get real excited about putting everything we have into Excel sheets. You might, and if you do, more power to you. I'm not one of those people, and so I depend on other tools. I have a spreadsheet for debt reduction because I like the format of trying to, stay focused on debt reduction within an Excel sheet. But as far as my investments, as far as my budget overall, I don't Excel spread any of those other things. I use other tools for, the fact that they're, easier to use, easier to input, easier to manipulate, they look better, it's just, there's all kinds of reasons why I personally, will use other tools beyond, as I mentioned, that kind of that net worth statement, the overall debt and assets that I track, which at this point I only track on about a quarterly basis, but interesting for me to track month to month how things are going that way, or at least quarter to quarter. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this week. You've got, of course, just the discussion board, which is what this class has. But again, I'd stress that we need to make sure and read all the instructions associated with the discussion board. Make sure and get all the points. It's worth a couple letter grades every single week on the discussion board. It's all we've got beyond the checkpoints to grade. So be careful and just make sure and carefully read all the instructions. This week is a good example of that. First of all, you've got 3 posts, 3 peer responses that you need to have in addition to the main post. Your main post needs to have a memo on budgeting, the importance of budgeting and living within your means. At least 100 words, which is pretty short actually. But in addition to that, the main post requires you to think of somebody who's a good money manager, interview one of them, and then post your feedback to that interview as well as part of your main post. So there's a lot of different pieces this week. If you're missing the interview, if you're missing, the memo, if you're missing 3 peer responses, those are all things that you wouldn't get full credit for if all of them weren't there. We need by Wednesday at midnight a memo, very short memo about the importance of living within your means and budgeting. And secondly, we need some content as part of your main post having to do with somebody's feedback about being a good money manager. Okay. And I'm not talking about investment money manager necessarily. I'm talking about somebody that you know well, like a friend, maybe it's a boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe it's somebody that you're well acquainted with at work. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's somebody at your church, somebody that you look to and you say, okay, I've known this person for some years and I know that they're very good with their money. Doesn't necessarily mean they make a lot of money. It just means that they're very good at managing. It's obvious to you from afar, even if you're not involved with them really personally, but you can see that they do a good job, or at least you interpret that they do a good job with their money. And then the idea is just ask them, just if you can have a few minutes, and either by phone or in person, just grab them for a few minutes and just ask them a few questions about what makes them successful managing their money. What kinds of tools or tricks do they use for budgeting or living within their means? What kinds of things do they believe about their money? And there's just some interesting ways and things that you can ask about their money to try to get them speaking and talking about what their philosophies are, so that you can then extrapolate or determine what kinds of things maybe you can integrate into what you do with your finances. And this isn't a situation where you need to get really personal. You're not talking about specifics, but people like to give advice. So if you ask them for advice about their finances and pay them the compliment of that you from afar have noticed that at least that it looks like or appears that they're very good with their money, ask them how they do it. What are their secrets to being so good about managing their money and being so disciplined about doing a good job with their finances? And they might laugh and say, "Oh, we do a horrible job," but stick with it, and just see if you can get any feedback or advice from someone about managing their money and being good with their money. Okay, so that should be an interesting interview. Like I say, it can be somebody very close to you. It should be somebody that you're well acquainted with, so that you can get some information and they won't feel awkward, to supply you with some advice. Okay. If you have any questions on that as you go to accomplish it, just reach out to me. No problem. We can talk about ideas for questions. We can talk about ideas for who to talk to. And I think you'll be in great shape. But it is due by Wednesday, so the sooner that you start to think about that interview, the better. All right. So this week we have about 5 or 6 different readings. I'm not going to cover all of them. One of the ones that I thought was a very, very good article was about how in our lives we deal with or cope with big life-changing events. So all of us have had life-changing events before. One's maybe as simple as leaving our house, right? Leaving the house that we lived with our parents, under their financial, when we were somebody else's financial responsibility, and hopefully for most of us, we're not somebody else's financial responsibility now. We're able to be more independent. That could be a big financial change for you, right? Big life change. Some of you may have gotten married. Some of you may have gotten divorced. Some of you may have lost a loved one to death or disability. Some of you may have lost a job. Some of you may have bought a home. Some of you may have had significant doctor bills or had a baby at some point. So there's this list of different events, and you can see them here on the screen, hopefully. But there's even some more that it goes over on this site. And what I think is important to consider is that each one of them comes with their own challenges and complexities as it pertains to our finances, right? So when you think about marriage, just for a second, if you're going to get married, whether or not you're the male or the female, or, doesn't matter who you are in the marriage, there's probably some costs associated with getting married. There's also some issues associated with combining finances with somebody else. Or at least becoming part of their financial household. So if it's a second or third marriage, many times you'll be encouraged to keep your finances separate, right? So you merge maybe one account where you share funds to take care of the household expenses and the needs of your family together. But then you also have your separate, finances. And there are some dynamics and some psychology that are challenging with that. There's also some significant challenge when you first, maybe the first time you get married, where one of you comes from maybe a culture or a family that is really tight and frugal, and maybe one of you comes from a family that has had more money and is more loose or easy with their money and easy with their spending. And trying to merge those two cultures or those two thoughts or identities when it comes to your finances, it can be very, very difficult. One of the things that the FDIC website talks about is trying to come together before you get married and talk through how you feel about money, how you feel about finances, how you feel about, how those decisions will be made once you are married. And there are a lot of different ways to do it. There's no one right answer, but communication and communication early and even before you're married can solve for a lot of the problems that potentially could happen. Of course, divorce has significant financial impact on our lives. It touches most all of us in some way. Most of us have a sibling or even ourselves, have been through this. And so I would say that divorce is one of those challenging things where you go to an attorney to do the divorce. Many times you look to that attorney for some financial feedback or some financial counseling, and attorneys really are not well positioned, nor are they well educated or trained when it comes to personal finances or investing. And so when it comes to splitting somebody's household of finances, it's very difficult, especially if it's been a longer marriage and there are different assets like 401ks and pensions and Social Security, different things like that. It's very difficult for both parties involved to understand what financial impacts are going to be there. Sometimes they don't until years later. I've sat down with clients, divorcees, that it's been years and they still don't know what the implications are for Social Security, for their pension, for the retirement account that their spouse had that was supposed to be divided, that wasn't divided. There's all kinds of different issues that can be undone or just still not settled even after the divorce has gone final. Okay. And it's important to counsel with either family or friends that could help, or a financial advisor of some kind if there are investments involved, to make sure that you lay claim to whatever part of the split that you're supposed to have. If you're the one getting split from, that you understand how that works and that what your part is in sometimes allowing that to happen. So if the divorce decree and what's called a QDRO, or I think it's a qualified domestic order or something like that, domestic relations order or something like that. The QDRO is what determines, though, how money is going to be moved, especially when it comes to like a 401k, because obviously, or sometimes I should say, not obviously, not all the time, but sometimes one spouse will have a 401k and it needs to be split. Well, if the spouse were to just take that 401k out, they'd get penalized and taxed for taking it out prior to retirement. But in the case of a divorce with a QDRO, a court-ordered, domestic relations order, they will they will allow for the distribution of that to a spouse, part of that 401k, without penalty and without taxation. But you have to have the right paperwork. It does take some processing. The attorneys usually don't do that for you. It's something that you have to do. So sometimes that's kind of an intimidating task. Financial advisor can help with that, but you can do it. It just might take a little bit of effort and energy and a little bit of patience on your part to be able to make that happen. But I would encourage you sooner than later, if you've got outstanding quadros, outstanding divorce decrees that have not been acted on, to act on them as soon as possible. Sometimes if you wait too long, there can be situations of circumstance that were unforeseen that create additional problems that would require you to get another attorney, go to more expense to try to get it done later. So try to get that stuff done as soon after a divorce as you possibly can. I know it's frustrating and hard, and you've already been through a lot by the time you get to the point where the divorce decree is final, but the longer you wait, sometimes the harder that gets to get what is rightfully yours, if the divorce decree states it. Okay, so that's a little bit about divorce. There are some more tips and tricks in this article, things to think about, things to expect when it comes to divorce. Babies obviously are awesome. They're exciting. They also are very expensive, right? We need to know how our health insurance is going to work, because that will affect us significantly financially if we don't understand what that doctor bill is going to look like. It could be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 or more if there are complications. And so we need to understand how our health care is going to interact with having a baby. In some places, individual health care plans do not cover anything regarding maternity. And in other places, they do. Some group plans have very low deductibles and cover maternity very well. Other group work plans don't cover maternity very well. And so there can be very different expenses based on what your health care looks like when it comes to having a child as far as the medical costs. Now, beyond just medical costs, right? Obviously, we've got to care for that child, by diapers, by formula, by clothes, different things that happen with a child. Many of you have already been through this, and you think, oh yeah, that's no problem. That's what I did. I made it work. Other people, if you haven't had a child yet, would be surprised at how expensive the whole idea of taking care of a child or taking care of children really is when it comes to their care and the financial obligations that come with children. So, not to scare any of you away, but just make sure, again, like marriage, that we communicate and think about and plan for and strategize regarding, having children, as opposed to just going in and hoping for the best. There are ways that we can prepare, things that we can do to make sure we're on track. Just something as simple as just making sure we understand our insurance and how much of the doctor bills will be our obligation is just such a significant advantage to somebody who has no idea how that's going to work, right? So then we have doctor bills, right? And a lot of times, out of control doctor bills come when we're not sufficiently covered with health insurance. We're between health insurance coverages, we're between jobs, we haven't had health care, and then something bad happens, and all of a sudden we've got these medical bills that we can't handle. Many, many divorces, a good percentage of divorces, or excuse me, not divorces, but bankruptcies that occur in this country are due to medical bills that people feel like they can't cover. Now, this isn't foolproof, but almost every single hospital has programs to either help you with payments, help you forgive even some of their debt. They usually have charitable aspects to the hospital that will, in certain circumstances, if you have low income or other significant circumstances, mitigating circumstances financially, they'll come in and help pay some of those bills. It's worth your time and effort to expend some energy talking to the hospital about, and they all have financial counselors now, talking to them about what your options might be if you feel like you're overwhelmed by doctor bills that have come. But one of the ways that we avoid these really, really big doctor bills is that we make sure that our healthcare coverage, our health insurance, is sufficient. And as expensive as it is and frustrating as it is to have health insurance, it's just one of those things that is the moment we don't have it is going to be the time that something happens and we'll need to have that coverage, won't have it, and won't be able to get either the care that we need or won't be able to pay for the care once we've had it. It'll put us into a tailspin financially. So I realize there are extenuating circumstances that, you know, healthcare can't help with, and that you still get piled up with doctor bills and debt. But in most cases, you know, no matter what happens to us financially, in most cases, we're able to cover it if we have an emergency reserve account, right? That's a slush fund that we talked about. We've got an emergency reserve account, and we have good health care. If we can check those two things off, we'll usually be in a bearable situation, maybe financially, even if it is unbearable as far as emotionally and other things, because obviously there's a lot more than just finances to a big medical issue, right? All right, so some different ways to look at doctor bills, different ways to negotiate them, different ways to talk with hospitals about programs and help that they might have to give you assistance. Home purchase programs, there's lots of them out there now. Different ways, especially if it's a first home purchase or you're buying in a rural area or you're low income. Any one of those three things apply. It's probably a different, unique program for you. And if one broker or bank does not refer to a program of some kind for your situation, if you're a first home buyer, then go to a different one, because there are lots of different programs out there, and it's worth, again, the effort and energy that we expend to go try to find out more information and be curious and try to do some research on what options are out there for us. Okay. Job loss obviously can be just devastating. You know, I was teaching these classes in 2010, right after the Great Recession of 2008, and people were still out of work. A lot of people were going back to school at that point because they couldn't find jobs, and it's a challenge that's real. Even though unemployment is fairly low right now, there's still thousands of people out there that can't find the type of job that can provide for their family. They might be able to find a job, but they can't find a job that will provide. And so job loss can be a devastating blow, especially if we don't have an emergency reserve. That's usually why they talked about having 3, 6, or 12 months worth of expenses in reserve. It's primarily because of this job loss prospect of at some point not having a job for a few months. And most people statistically in the world, okay, and actually I should take that back. Statistically, it's a statistic that's specific to the United States and here in the U.S. But statistically, they say that the average American is one paycheck away from bankruptcy. What do they mean by that? Most people don't have even 1 month's worth of expenses sitting in an account ready in the case of an emergency. And many people learned the lesson the hard way back in 2008, but many people that I talked to that had a hard time in 2008 still haven't, been able to put any money back together, as far as a savings account. They're just trying to stay above water, right, and tread. And so that's where, budgeting and trying to save a little bit each month is just so important, because even at a small monthly amount, or even at a small amount each time you get a paycheck, you can put together what can be a pretty substantial chunk of change within a year or two if you're focused on it. And even if you have to give up some things to get there, I think it's well worth it. Because at some point, if it's not job loss, it's one of these other things, but we're going to have these events that happen that make it challenging for us financially. And then there's home mortgage payment programs, and this website also talks about different programs to help you if you're already in a mortgage, to make sure and defer, delay payments for a little while if you're running into a significant financial situation. Okay. All right, so that site, I think, does a very good job. That article does a very good job talking through life-changing events that most all of us will have, or interact with as far as our household financially over our lifetimes, maybe even multiple times over and over and over again, these different issues. And so, again, emergency reserves, the right kind of coverage, the right kind of situation, willingness to talk to different places, get advice from different places, get help. Those things all can come together to put you back on track sooner than later. Doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, but just means that it won't derail you completely, won't put your whole financial life on its head if you've prepared, hopefully, and done all you can do to be prepared for that moment. Now, back in 2008, so almost 10 years ago, I had worked for 5 years in the financial services industry as a financial advisor, and I was getting pretty comfortable. I'd gotten my certified financial planner license. I had gotten my master's degree in financial services. I had other designations. I had lots what I thought were very good clients here in Utah County, which is where I have a practice. And so I decided in 2008 to put out a shingle, to go out on my own, to leave the company I'd been with for 5 years and to start up my own business. And I brought in a business partner. He focused on insurance. I focused on investments, and we started a company. And for a year, we ran this company. Well, if anybody remembers how bad 2008 was, we started this company right before things got horrible. And we ran this company right while things were just about as bad as they possibly could be. The stock market lost almost half its value from the peak of the fall in 2007 through the low point in May of 2009. And that's about the exact window that we tried to run our own business with investments, which not a great time to ask people to start with a small company when everybody's scared to death of their finances at that point. So anyway, long story short, after a year, I ended up leaving that company. My business partner still runs that company, but he was more focused on insurance, and insurance is less volatile and more predictable and more profitable actually at the time than investments were. So I left, ended up at JP Morgan and did fine from that point. But the reason I tell this story is because if you would have ever told me during the first 5 years of my career in financial services, if I'd ever financially have a struggle or a hard time paying my bills or a hard time paying my mortgage or a hard time paying my, or get into some credit card debt or whatever, I'd have said, no way. I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. I'm on top of things. I got all my finances figured out. And having that job, that business fail basically for a year and having to use money out of all my reserves and use debt to try to keep it afloat for a year, I came out of that situation really in financial kind of ruin, in just a really bad financial situation, tried to dig my way out. And it took years to dig myself out just a little bit at a time and get back on my feet. Again, the reason I bring this up is because none of us are immune, no matter how good we think we are with our money. None of us are immune from having challenges at some point, things that are out of our control that happen to us. We can try to make all the decisions that we can in a good way and be, as responsible as we can with our money. And then sometimes the storm hits, and the storm hits us hard in circumstances that were unforeseen or unpredictable or just something we couldn't even plan for. And it's okay. Those kinds of things, I think, happen to more of us than you would think. I bet in the average group of people, a class like this with 20 or 30 people, probably more than half of us have gone through this kind of situation where we just feel like we get kicked in the teeth, punched in the face, whatever, analogy you want to use, dumped in the pit, whatever. And we're just trying to tread or get out. And we feel like financially we're kind of, we're losing time. We're losing life financially. And it takes patience, and it takes sometimes a lot of time to dig our way out of those things. But I will say that that we can do it, and if you think things are all lost financially, I'd encourage you to get in touch with me, because I've been there. It's a very hard road. It's depressing. It's challenging. It is emotionally very taxing, but it's something that you can dig your way out of, just one little step at a time, one baby step at a time, and not get overwhelmed by how big the mountain is that you got to climb, to get out of the pit, but just focus on what you can control and everyday activities to try to maximize how far you get in a day, to make progress, and minimize how far further you get, you slide back, right? So even if you're taking a couple steps forward and sliding back a step, you've still got some net progress that you're making. And even if it's small, at some point you'll get out of that hole. And financially, like I say, it's really challenging. It can be depressing. It can be, just one of the hardest things emotionally that you ever deal with, to have one of these life-changing events happen and then financially feel like you're completely backwards or upside down. But you can resolve any one of those situations and get back on top, sometimes sooner than later, depending on how severe the situation is. But ultimately, even if it requires bankruptcy, even if it requires something really extreme like that, sometimes that's what has to happen in order for you to climb out and get back on track. So I don't judge anybody, because like I say, I've been through some challenges myself. And I just hope that all of you will keep the hope if you're in a situation where you feel like you're losing ground each month. I mean, we talk about the ideal, right, with budgeting. We talk about the ideal with lifestyle and living within your means. And I know For a handful of you, you just feel like you're drowning, and financially, and there's no way out. I'd still encourage you to make effort towards trying to have a budget, trying to make some progress, even if it's just so small, the progress that you're making, but still try to make that progress and get yourself in the patterns and systems that you need so that when you do get done with your degree and get that job change or that career advancement that you're looking for, and you do get an increase in pay, that you'll have systems in place already and know exactly how to manage those resources as they come, to pay down debt, to get back on track, to get that emergency reserve ramped up, and to make sure that your retirement's getting added to. Okay? All right. So there's another one, feedthepig.org. This is the AICPA, the Association of Certified Public Accountants that we talked about last week, I think, because there was also an article on the feedthepig.org from last week. This week's article talks about the 50-30-20 principle that Elizabeth Warren brought up. She is a politician back east. Many of you have heard of her name. Some of you may have not. Point is, she had a pretty good financial rule of thumb. And I don't know that she came up with it, but she's given credit in the article. And that is that 50% of your money goes to fixed costs each month, needs that you have. 30% goes to wants, things that you want to have. And 20% of your income should go to savings and debt reduction. And if you kind of keep your budget within those confines, you'll be in great shape. The challenge that happens for many people is between rent, a car payment, utilities, basic food, basic necessities of life. They get through their needs, and it's far beyond 50% of their income. And so it kind of blows this whole thing up. So if you're in that situation, what it should do is it should cause you to pause and think about the fixed expenses and needs that you have. Some of them might not actually be needs. Like you might say cable is a need. Well, that's a matter of opinion from one person to another, right? You might be able to cut that out. A car payment, you might say, well, I have to have a car. Well, you might have to have a car, but you might be paying $400 a month for a very nice car when you could be paying $200 a month for more of a moderate vehicle, somewhere that does get you place to place. And frankly, you might find that you don't have enough money within your needs to have the housing that you have or have the car at all. You might need to take public transportation. I mean, there's just different things, as hard as they sound and as bad as it sounds to go down that road. If you can keep those fixed expenses and needs within 50% of what you make, then you'll be able to make some progress on paying for things that you enjoy and want, and also paying down debt, getting an emergency reserve, and saving for the future like we've talked about over and over tonight. It does take effort, though. You got to reduce your costs and really, really look at them. Every single cost, whether or not it's a cell phone bill or insurance bill or rent, whatever it is, and analyze every one of them and really run through the exercise of, could I save some money on this? Is it reasonable to think that I could, ask for less payment or go find somewhere that costs less or find something that costs less? Most of us can do a cost analysis and find some things where we can take out. You also can find out and really think, and this, I've already referred to it with the cable bill, but basically the needs versus wants. Is this really a need, or is there a way that we can still accomplish what we need to accomplish without this or with less? And that's, again, a challenging exercise, but it's an important one if we're going to try to get into this 50-30-20 regimen. And then, of course, tracking and budgeting will help with it. I would add one more thing, and that is that, again, we talked last week about cutting costs as one side of the coin, increasing income as the other. And going back to school, getting a degree, trying to get career advancement, asking for promotions, asking for raises, asking for additional opportunities, creating side jobs for yourself, those kinds of things, finding additional work opportunities beyond your normal work schedule. These are all ways that we can increase the left side of the ledger, or the income side, right? So if we can increase flows, we don't necessarily have to put all the pressure on needs versus wants and cost reduction. It's probably going to be a balance effort between both in most cases. All right, and then finally, there's a good article among others. We've got like 5 required readings. We're just talking about 4 of them. But there's an interesting article about money attitude. And basically what it comes down to, and there's lots of literature out there about this. You can go out and research, not just it's kind of a subset of behavioral finance, and how we deal with our finances is based on a lot about our psychology, and how we think about money. But basically this article is kind of high level. It doesn't go very deep, but it gives you some ideas about how important it is that we think about money in a positive way. So some of us think about money as if it's evil. Like at its core, it's an evil thing. And so we don't want too much of it, because that will be a bad thing for us. And if we make too much money, or if we earn money, or if we earn more than the next person, we feel guilty, or we don't feel worthy of it. There's a lot of different things that can affect us. Maybe we make more money than our parents made, and we know that they worked really hard, so we feel bad about that. Now, some of you might be saying, well, I never thought that. But what's interesting is what they find when they really look into, when they really dig in and really talk to people about how they feel about money. A lot of people, a lot more than you would think, have some of these attitudes about money that are kind of debilitating. And I don't mean debilitating in a physical sense, but debilitating in talking about our ability to make money and to manage our money. Some people really, when you dig down, feel like they don't know, they don't expect to enjoy retirement. Their parents didn't, so they don't expect to do that. People they know don't, so they don't expect to need to enjoy retirement. So they don't save for retirement, because that's too far out, and they just don't expect to be able to enjoy it. Some people don't expect to live that long. They don't expect their health to hold up in order for them to be able to enjoy retirement. Some people feel like they don't, as like we talked about, don't deserve to make more than what their parents did, or what their friends do, or what their colleagues do at work. And so that's a challenge for some people. And as crazy as it sounds to some people, when you're able to visualize what you're worth, and visualize you making more, and visualize some of these goals that you have for your future financially, paying down debt, having a comfortable retirement, when you're able to start to visualize some of these things, even if it takes a lot of effort initially, you actually can start to change the direction that you're on, the path that you're on financially. And, obviously Tony Robbins and others will talk and talk and talk until they're blue in the face about how you just have to think. You just have to think, self-affirmations. If you just think that you're, popular, then you will be. And if you think that you're rich and successful, then you will be. If you think that you're a positive person, a happy person, then you will be. And while I don't buy into all of it, I do buy into some of it. And I especially buy into how healthy it is for us to really think about why we think the way we do about money. Whether or not we believe, we need to save and invest and deserve a comfortable retirement, deserve a comfortable life financially, deserve to be able to help others with money. Those kinds of things can be challenging for some people, and the psychology of it. And I do believe to a certain extent that if you will map out a future financially for you and put some effort and time and planning and strategy into trying to accomplish those things, that there is real impact from having those goals. It doesn't change anything for today, but over time you put yourself on a different trajectory when you're mapping out a future that financially is better than today. And most of us have that goal, but we don't map it out. We don't set goals to accomplish it. We don't really think, we think about it in the sense that we wish that was us when we look at other people, but we don't think about it in terms of ourselves at all. And we don't believe for ourselves that that's even available in many cases, when in many cases it is. So they will have this psychology, this poor person psychology, which basically is that if you have somebody who grows up poor, they think that that's what they are, and that's who they are, and that's what they'll always be. And they rarely can get out of that cycle of poverty because they don't believe in themselves able to accomplish anything more with their lives, because that's who they are and that's what they've been raised in. And it's tough to break out of that. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time, and this article does too, talking about how we need to think through what are the reasons that we think about money the way we do, and are there some of those things that are in our kind of our money culture, money identity, who we think we are from a money standpoint? Are there some of those things that we can work at to break out of? The poor attitudes that are associated with maybe some of us and how we think about money. So a couple things. Billy Graham has an interesting quote as part of this article. If a person gets his attitude towards money straight, it will straighten out almost every other area in his life. And this is an interesting one because I think we all know that financial stress can stress everything else about our lives. It can stress relationships that we have. It can stress us out and create health problems for us. Money can be the root of a lot of our problems in life. It can make us miserable, right? It can, if we never feel like we have enough, and we always feel like we're getting picked on, at our workplace, and if we never have as much as our neighbor type of thing, and we're always, jealous and envious of what they have, those kinds of things can drive us crazy and really cause us to be emotionally distant and depressed, and can cause all kinds of problems. That can lead to other issues with our health, other issues with our relationships that are important in life. And so, while I don't think it's it doesn't solve everything, obviously there's a lot more to life than, having sufficient for what we need as far as money is concerned. But having good money management skills, no matter what we make, no matter how much we earn, can relieve a lot of the stress and pressure that finances could create for our lives. If we have a plan, if we have a strategy, if we've mapped it out, if we're budgeting, like we've talked about, if we've automated some of our systems, if we're always improving ourselves, asking for additional opportunities, going back to school like you all are doing, those kinds of things can be stressful in the short term, but long term, they can pay significant dividends and be a huge investment for our future. And so I do believe there's some truth to this, that money can straighten out a lot of other things in life. And while it doesn't cure everything, obviously, and can actually create problems for us if we're so focused on it, but there's some balance, right? If we've got enough for us and enough to help others, enough to be of service to others, enough to not be anxious all the time about it, that can be a really liberating thing for us and our lives. Silly one by Mark Hansen here. The best way to help the poor is not to be one of them. There's a lot of different ways you can look at this. You can be cynical about it and just be like, well, that's kind of a jerky thing. Some people are just going to be poor, and we need to be more sympathetic and empathetic about them and actually help them out. I don't think he's saying we shouldn't help them out. I think what he's saying is, if you want to, the biggest thing that you can do is what you can do, right? And that's for yourself, being self-reliant or the ability to take care of yourself is your first priority. And obviously we can help the poor a lot better if we're not one of them. So it might sound kind of callous, but there's a reality to it as well. And that is that we can definitely be more helpful if we've got our own financial house in order. Okay. So then it talks about, money as far as, is it just inherently good or bad? How do we look at it? Do we look at it as evil, is money evil, or is money a good thing? So how do we look at it? There's an exercise to kind of how you think about it and how that might affect how you deal with money. Is money for having, or is money for doing? Does money represent something that you can do with your family? Does money represent something you can do for somebody else, or something charitable? Does money represent having more time? Or does it represent just a number that you're trying to amass, that you're trying to get to some number and just always trying to amass more numbers, right? If you think about having, as the goal, I think you might think about this time of year, A Christmas Carol and Scrooge, right? It was about, the idea was just having more and more of it. Not necessarily doing any good with it, but just amassing as much as you possibly can. That was Scrooge's thing, right? And then you have, somebody else who might not have anything, or might not, what we call, be really rich, but they use the money that they have in intelligent ways to both care for their family, and they have what they need, and they're also able to have more time. Money can mean that they have more time, discretionary time, to spend with their family and spend with people that they care about, and they can also have more time and resources to help others if that's what they choose to do. So money can mean a lot of things differently for different people, right? Are we just trying to amass it, or are we trying to do something with it? Does it represent something that we can actually accomplish? And the last thing it says, we can value, respect, and use time wisely, or something we can devalue, squander, and wonder where it all went. And he's talking about time, Ryan Lowe is, and what the article refers to is that this is something you could definitely, relate to money, right? If we don't think about it, if we don't plan for it, if we don't have a strategy, if we don't have, if we don't keep track of it, like we've talked about this week and last week, then all of a sudden we can wonder where it went, right? Instead of knowing, what it accomplished and what it actually could do. So I think it's worth this week, especially this article about money attitude, it's worth kind of just taking a self-evaluation, an inventory of yourself, self-reflective this week about money and about how you think about it and about why you are trying to accomplish some money. Is it just to break even and pay the bills and keep things afloat, or is there something more that you're trying to accomplish? That more, or that vision, or that goal, like I say, can help us to budget, can help us to be more disciplined. If we have that bigger picture that we're working for, it can make us a lot more successful with our money. But the bottom line is, when it comes to lifestyle, as we've talked about in the past, it really comes down to spending less than we make. It goes back to that SNL skit with Steve Martin. And if you haven't seen it, just Google SNL and Steve Martin and the skit on money. And it's a famous short SNL skit, so it's not going to take a lot of your time, but it's basically, the point of it is, don't spend more than you make, right? Spend less than what you make. It's really simple. We all know that that's how it's supposed to go, but most of us, it's a challenge at different times to spend less than we make, and not to get into more debt, and to be able to save and invest for the future. And so if you haven't seen that little skit, I'd encourage you to go watch it. Have a great week this week. If you get caught on anything as far as any of your work, let me know. Happy to help. We'll look forward to grading your discussion boards, and you'll see those in the next day or so as far as some feedback and your grades. If you have any questions on that, let me know. And then, like I say, if you have any problems or questions this week as you get going on the new discussion board, reach out to me. All right. Have a great night and a good week.